talked about people of a lot of different stripes. We have talked about Black people, we have talked about immigrants, and that's the kind of identity politics that Democrats sometimes get accused of. I think we bristle at that phrase because we recognize that everyone has an identity, that everything is identity politics, and these are identities that have so long gone under-celebrated and underheard in our politics. I would be remiss, of course, if I didn't ask you to speak about one of the identities that happens to account for half of all Americans, and that, of course, would be women. What would you do as a member of Congress to serve the women of the 5th District? And perhaps appropriately, but accidentally, Claire, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, so an issue near and dear to my heart, not just because I am a woman, but because I've spent the better part of my life advocating for women, working with women. You know, as a survivor of sexual assault, I'll start with the fact that we have got to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. It is absolutely, it's absurd that we have Congress people that can put a feather in their hat and say, I voted against the Violence Against Women Act. And so we have got to address immediately the sort of, as I say about education, you have to feel safe in your home, in your classroom in order to be able to learn. You have to feel safe as a woman in our communities in order to be able to truly participate, right? We need equality and access. Equality in women's healthcare is not an afterthought. Full stop. It's not just about having the rights to my body. It's not just about repealing the Hyde Amendment. It's not just about protecting Roe v. Wade. It's about requiring insurance companies to provide annual services as opposed to now every 3 years, critical screening services that protect women's health. It's about, I mean, the list goes on and on. It's about, it is ultimately, it's about access to you know, healthcare facilities. This is something that we're seeing all over our country. Republicans are systematically closing clinics that provide critical care to women. It is absolutely unacceptable and we have to put an end to it. But some of the things that I worked on when I worked with the Obama administration, when Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, was recognizing that women are the greatest stakeholders in peace and women are the greatest stakeholders in the way that we resolve conflict. And so they must be at the table.
Thanks very much, Claire. Cameron, you'd be next.
I think just to start, I'll say that it's great to follow Claire's lead on that, because I think that it's important that her voice is first and foremost. That was completely accidental. I think you just answered 2 questions in a row first, but I think that even still, it's so important to hear women's voices first and to lift those voices. And so, you know, it's lifting alongside. I think for me, I've been doing equity work for a long time. I always say when it comes to women's issues, it's not because I love my mom or because I respect my wife or because I want my daughter to have opportunities. Those are all true and they all help sharpen my perspective. But at the end of the day, it's because I'm committed to equity and justice. It's because I'm committed to everyone having opportunities to succeed. And it's because I recognize and I know pretty well that our society has been designed to blunt the success and opportunities of individuals. And so that includes advocating alongside women for things like equal pay for equal work, for things like paid family leave, and for things like women's reproductive health access. Women have the right to choose, and there's nothing that should stand in the way of their ability to decide what to do with their bodies. And I think that as a man in this space, what I know very well is that it's important for me to shut up and to listen and to pay attention and to be the best ally that I can be. And so I'll just stop there.
Well, thanks very much. And let me add my apology. I've been so engrossed by your answers that I've lost track of the order. You're all doing such a thorough job. So let me see then. I think that means that we would be back to John. Is that all right? Can we get nods and affirmation that I'm on the right person?
Sure.
No, it's not. It's RD. RD, you follow Cameron. See?
Man, Sally Hudson just scrubbing me right out. Guys, the first thing is I live with an OBGYN. We talk about women's healthcare every day of my life. You know, I couldn't sleep in my own bed if you know, we didn't have those very intense discussions. So let me just say a couple things about this. There is no purpose for a man in Richmond or DC to subjugate their judgment for a woman and her doctor. That doesn't need to happen. It doesn't need to happen in any zip code in America. That's completely ridiculous. I mean, we don't make different rules for men. The idea that women would have different rules really upsets the Huffstetlers, and it's something that, you know, Emily has told me a lot about this subject. And Let me give you one other example here in Virginia, which I often talk about. The labor and delivery ward in Henry County might close, something we've been trying to be somewhat helpful with. Times to a delivery ward materially impact fetal and maternal outcomes. Now just think about that for a second. How long it takes a woman to get to the hospital might impact whether her baby lives or not. And that's a discussion about equity. That's a discussion about treating people fairly. That's a discussion about people being able to live their own lives where they live here in our state and be treated the same. The second thing is pay equity. We've got to do a much better job of ensuring that companies have transparency on how they're paying folks for what jobs they're paying them for. A big part of this is that we move to paternity leave instead of just maternity leave. That's a big penalty sometimes for women in the workforce. And the last thing I'll say is, this is a big issue I hear a lot about from women in the district here, is gun violence. There's this concept called a boyfriend loophole, which means that if a woman isn't married to a partner, then he can still have access to his firearms even if he's threatening her life. And that's why we need extreme risk protection orders that protect a woman, and a woman needs to feel safe in her home. That's a big part of things that I've learned in the last couple of years about women voters in the 5th District, and obviously I'm still learning.
Thanks very much. And with only one left, I think that means we're going to John. Clearly, with Zoom, I can't put you in a row, and so I have to re-alphabetize in my head. And I do 1, 2, 3s, not ABCs.
The anchor man again, and happy to follow up with all of my great fellow candidates here who put forward so many very strong thoughts. And tip of the cap to you too, Sally, and the General Assembly for doing so much for women's reproductive rights in this session with the trap laws, making Virginia a safe haven, which is something that is especially important in COVID-19 as we see women that need reproductive health services, that they may be able, as of July 1, to come to Virginia to get that. We're certainly leading from the front. No doubt that if the nominee for the Democrats may very well face Bob Good, and Bob Good is a candidate who is going to look to turn back the clock on everything having to do with women's equality, whether it's women's reproductive rights, whether it's gender equality in the workplace. He is going to be very bad news for all of us, but I think especially for women. So we need to be standing up, all of us Democrats, for women's rights. I mentioned earlier, I think it was the education question, that the pay disparity between men and women is entrenched in our society. We need to look at that. We need to do what we can at the federal level to fix whether it's these inequalities that we see in wage earning or whether it's in healthcare, because women's healthcare is healthcare, as my wife reminds me constantly, and she is retired from occupational therapy practice and has a life in healthcare, had a career in healthcare. So all these ideas we've shared here today need to be handled at the federal level, and we better be ready to fight for them because the Republicans are going to come after them.